Look at the people in your life, your friends, your coworkers, the person you share a coffee with. You think you know them, right? You trust your own judgment, your own intuition about who is good and who is not. But what if your intuition is completely, catastrophically wrong? What if one of the kindest, most charming, and most empathetic people you know is secretly a monster? This isn't a hypothetical question from a horror movie. It is the true, lived nightmare of the legendary true crime writer Ann Rule. Her masterpiece, The Stranger Beside Me, is not just the definitive story of the infamous serial killer Ted Bundy. It is her own haunting, personal confession of how she became friends with evil, and never saw a thing. This book is one of the most terrifying documents ever written, not just for the crimes it describes, but for the profound and deeply unsettling philosophical question it forces us to ask. How well can we ever truly know another person? It is a journey into the mind of a psychopath, a chronicle of a sprawling police investigation, and ultimately, a story about the chilling discovery that the person you are confiding in, the person you are sharing your secrets with, is the very stranger that everyone is looking for. To understand the unique horror of this story, you have to begin where Ann Rule began, not with a crime, but with a friendship. In the early 1970s, Ann Rule was a former police officer, a struggling single mother, and an aspiring writer, trying to make a name for herself by covering small-time crimes for True Detective magazines. To make ends meet and to do some good in the world, she took a volunteer shift at a suicide crisis hotline in Seattle. It was there, in the quiet, late-night hours, surrounded by ringing phones and human desperation, that she met a young man named Ted, and this is the Ted that she, and the world, would first come to know. He was not a monster, he was the model volunteer. He was a handsome, brilliant, and charismatic pre-law student. He was politically ambitious, working on a governor's campaign, and most importantly, at the crisis clinic, he was incredibly good at his job. Ann Rule watched with admiration as her new friend Ted would talk to people on the brink of suicide, his voice calm, reassuring, and deeply empathetic. He literally saved lives. They became friends. They would sit together during the long, quiet shifts, sharing their dreams and their secrets. Ann, an older, divorced mother, would talk about her struggles to raise her children and build a writing career. Ted would talk about his political ambitions, his mysterious family history, and his feelings of loneliness. He seemed like a perfect gentleman, a kind, sensitive, and slightly sad young man with a bright future. Ann liked him. She trusted him. She considered him her friend. While Ann Rule was building her friendship with Ted Bundy at the crisis clinic, a dark and terrifying shadow was beginning to fall over the Pacific Northwest. Young, beautiful, college-age women, all with long hair parted in the middle, started disappearing. One after another, they would vanish in broad daylight, from college campuses, from busy state parks. There were no witnesses, no signs of a struggle, no ransom notes. They were just gone. A sense of panic began to grip the region. Law enforcement was baffled. The disappearances were happening across different counties and even different states, and in the pre-computer, pre-DNA era of the 1970s, the various police departments were not effectively communicating with each other. Ann Rule, in her role as a crime reporter, was following the story closely. She was horrified by the cases, and she felt a deep empathy for the victims and their families. She attended the press conferences. She knew the detectives working the case. She was, in a professional capacity, hunting for the very same monster that she was, in a personal capacity, sharing late-night conversations with over coffee. The two parallel tracks of Ann Rule's life, her friendship with Ted and her investigation into the Ted murders, finally and terrifyingly collide in the fall of 1974. Frustrated by a lack of leads, the police released a new set of information to the public. They were looking for a handsome, charming young man, probably a student, who often wore his arm in a cast or a sling as a ruse to ask young women for help carrying his books. And most importantly, he drove a bronze-colored Volkswagen Beetle. This dual narrative creates an almost unbearable sense of tension and dread. We are placed directly inside Ann Rule's shoes, forced to experience the slow, dawning horror of the truth as she eventually would. The narrative cuts back and forth between Ann's quiet life with her friend Ted and the escalating horror of the Ted murders, as the press had nicknamed the unknown killer. The reader knows the truth. We are watching a slow-motion car crash, screaming at the page, as Ann describes her friendly conversations with the man we know as a monster. This dual narrative creates an almost unbearable sense of tension and dread. This book is one of the most terrifying documents ever written, not just for the crimes it describes, but for the profound and deeply unsettling philosophical question it forces us to ask. How well can we ever truly know another person? It is a journey into the mind of a psychopath, a chronicle of a sprawling police investigation, and ultimately, a story about the chilling discovery that the person you are confiding in, the person you are sharing your secrets with, is the very stranger that everyone is looking for. The two parallel tracks of Ann Rule's life, her friendship with Ted, and her investigation into the Ted murders, finally and terrifyingly collide in the fall of 1974. Frustrated by a lack of leads, the police released a new set of information to the public. They were looking for a handsome, charming young man, probably a student, who often wore his arm in a cast or a sling as a ruse to ask young women for help carrying his books. And most importantly, he drove a bronze-colored Volkswagen Beetle. Her first reaction was one of complete and total denial. It was impossible, it was a coincidence, a sick and terrible one, but nothing more. The Ted she knew was the kindest, most gentle man imaginable. He was the man who saved lives, who talked people down from the brink of despair. He couldn't be this monster. The idea was absurd, a betrayal of everything she thought she knew, and yet, as a former police officer and a professional crime writer, she knew she couldn't just ignore it. So, racked with a sense of guilt and disbelief, she did what she felt she had to do. She picked up the phone and she called the police, giving them the name of her friend, Ted Bundy. She was convinced she was just clearing his name, ruling him out as a suspect so that the police could focus on finding the real killer. She had no idea that she was, in fact, closing the net. This is the turning point of the book. It's the moment when the stranger is no longer just a character in her articles, but a ghost sitting right beside her. Her life from this point on becomes a psychological nightmare, a desperate struggle to reconcile the two Teds, the kind, empathetic friend she knew, and the monstrous predator the evidence was beginning to reveal. The slow and horrifying unmasking. The rest of The Stranger Beside Me is the story of this slow, horrifying, and undeniable unmasking. For a long time, Anne clung to the hope that it was all a mistake. Even after Ted was arrested for the first time in Utah for a kidnapping, she found ways to rationalize it. It was a frame-up. It was a case of mistaken identity. Her unique position as both his friend and a respected crime writer gave the book its most surreal and chilling quality. She continued to correspond with him in prison. He would write her long, articulate letters proclaiming his innocence and complaining about the injustice of it all. He would call her in the middle of the night, collect, to talk about his case, to ask for her support, to maintain the illusion of their friendship. And a part of her, the part that remembered the kind young man from the crisis clinic, still wanted to believe him. But then came the daring and dramatic escapes. Bundy, acting as his own lawyer in Colorado, escaped from custody not once, but twice. The second time, he disappeared completely, becoming the subject of a massive, nationwide manhunt. This was a turning point for Ann Rule. The actions of an innocent man, framed for a crime he didn't commit, were not to escape and become a fugitive. The evidence was becoming too much to ignore. The final, brutal, and undeniable truth came in January of 1978. After his escape, Ted Bundy made his way to Florida, and there his mask of sanity completely disintegrated. He broke into a sorority house at Florida State University, and in the space of 15 minutes, he brutally attacked 4 young women, killing 2 of them. A few weeks later, he abducted and murdered his final victim, a 12-year-old girl named Kimberly Leach. When he was finally caught, there was no more room for doubt. The evidence was overwhelming. The charming, intelligent law student was gone. In his place stood a monster. For Ann Rule, this was the final, devastating confirmation. The friend she had known and trusted was not real. She had been an audience, a philosophical autopsy of the mask of sanity. The final part of the book is Ann Rule's attempt to answer the question that haunts the entire story. How? How could this happen? How could Ted Bundy fool so many people for so long, including a trained former police officer and a professional observer of the criminal mind like herself? Her answer is a deep and terrifying dive into the psychology of the psychopath. She explores the concept of the mask of sanity, a term coined by the psychiatrist Hervey Cleckley. A psychopath is not the wild-eyed, raving lunatic of the movies. They are often the exact opposite. As one psychologist described him, a machine that was exquisitely constructed but with some essential parts missing. Anne Rule has to confront the chilling reality that her entire friendship with him was a lie. She had not been his friend, she had been his audience. It is a warning about the absolute limits of our own intuition. It is a terrifying reminder that some people are not what they seem, and that the face of evil can be handsome, charming, and utterly, convincingly normal. The book is a masterpiece of true crime because it does more than just recount the facts of a case. It forces us to live inside the chilling, personal reality of the story. It shatters our most basic assumptions about how we judge character and what it means to truly know someone. It is a dark but necessary inquiry into the deepest and most frightening mysteries of the human heart. If you believe that we must study the darkness to understand the nature of our own reality, then you are in the right place. Welcome to Geeky Philosopher. Subscribe, and let's continue the inquiry into the complex and often chilling questions of the human condition.